This is the examination of the hidden human condition.
You're listening to the Hidden Killers Podcast.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Brueski.
We are having a conversation right now, an ongoing conversation with the author of the book While Idaho Slept. Ruben Appleman is with us on the program. Tell me, how did this journey continue? Once there was an arrest in the case, we have a suspect. We still didn't know a whole lot about him. It seemed rather odd that someone would throw away all of that education, all of that work, all of that time that one had spent learning criminal justice on something like this, where still to this day, as us recording this, we still don't really quite know what the connection is there or why something like this would have ever taken place. Not that there's ever justification for it ever, but it's still kind of an enigma. And I think a lot of people are wondering about that. You and on the outside, those of us who aren't there, we only hear what is being reported out of Moscow. If we're not there, we can't hear the scuttlebutt, if you will, on the street, the people talking, the things that a community keeps into itself that doesn't necessarily make the newspapers or the websites. What were you hearing initially, and where did your attention go as that continued forward?
Well, there's a lot in there. You're really good at this, by the way. I like listening to your show, Tony. Let me start with something that comes to mind. There were 3 or 4 places I could have gone with what you were saying, but when they first announced the arrest of Bryan Kohberger, who, by the way, nowhere in the book do I say that Bryan Kohberger is guilty of these crimes. What I say and what I believe is that the police believe he is guilty of these crimes, and the prosecutor believes he is guilty of these crimes, and the evidence that they put forward seems to show that he is guilty of these crimes, and I have no reason to believe that the police have made anything up. I also think the way any normal person would think is that we don't know everything that the police have on Bryan Kohberger. We only know as much as was needed to know to get the arrest. Mm-hmm. They're not going to lay out their entire case, and in fact, after the arrest, they no doubt gathered much more evidence that, of course, the public does not know because we haven't had a trial yet.
Sure.
But what I first thought was, when they arrest somebody, everybody's quick to jump on the bandwagon of, the sort of string them up, kind of thing, whatever you'd call it nowadays. Guilty as charged is what people immediately assume, and because that's what crowds do. I was thinking like everybody else, wow. I was not surprised, actually. I thought this makes a lot of sense that a criminology student would be that person, because there are certain types of people who study criminology or go into law enforcement or commit crimes. And I'm not saying they're the same. What I'm saying is that criminals and crime fighters are both comfortable walking what I call the ghost trail, that space between what regular society perceives is real and what the sort of darker underworld knows is real. Mm-hmm. And crime fighters and criminals can walk that ghost trail between the two spaces very easily for their whole lives. I know as an investigator, I walk that space. I say in my first book, when you're standing in Starbucks ready to order your latte, I'm seeing blood on the walls, not because I'm visually, literally seeing blood, but because I'm looking for shooters. I'm paying attention to what's going on. The darker aspects of the world get into my mind, and I see those things at times. Mm-hmm. When I see a child walking alone on the street, I think, I hope nobody's following her. Mm-hmm. This is where my mind is. I want to protect people.
Sure.
That's why people go into law enforcement, but it's also where the criminal mind goes. The criminal mind sees that child walking alone and thinks that child's vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And that's sometimes their guidepost, right? Yeah. So it's a very interesting place where people like Kohberger, like what I'm assuming Kohberger and others, where they fit in. Now, I wasn't shocked to hear that, but I also don't think finishing half of a semester or being one half of one semester into a PhD program makes you a genius. I have a master's degree, and I am no genius. All it would have taken for me to be in a PhD program is to apply. Mm-hmm. And I'm a relatively intelligent guy with a decent way of communicating. I can make sense of stuff more or less. But when I'm in a room of geniuses, I know it, and I'm not them, right? Mm-hmm. So there was a lot made about Kohberger's, brilliant mind or whatever. He barely finished his first semester. I mean, he was arrested, toward the end of the semester. But we know now that he had been fired previously from his teaching assistantship, and that would have negated his funding for the rest of his PhD program. Mm-hmm. So it's very likely Bryan Kohberger had effed up everything in his life at this point. He was not on the fast track to success. He thought he was. He had made gains. He had kicked heroin. He had lost 100 pounds as a teenager, which is a lot of discipline and a lot of hard work. If you have 100 pounds to lose as a teenager, you're a big boy. And he figured out how to get rid of that through hard work and discipline. And he in an area that had really poor schooling, or poor higher education percentages, let's call it, very few people who went on to higher ed from there. He was able to get a master's degree. He came from not a wealthy family, a lot of poverty in the area, a lot of drugs everywhere around him. They called the area, one of his friends told me that they called the area, his school district was called Pleasant Valley School District. One of his friends told me they called the area Pregnant Valley School District because of the high rates of teen pregnancy. Mm-hmm. He came from that, and yes, he got into a PhD program, and one of his professors said he was brilliant. But it's all relative. One of his professors in his grad school, but it's all relative. He might have appeared brilliant out of a population of people that don't really go to higher ed. And
okay, yeah.
So of course that's the impression, but look, he wasn't doing that great. He wasn't a great communicator with his. He either was a non-communicator or an over-communicator, badgering people. He didn't have much going for him, but he got into the PhD program. And as soon as he got away from home, as soon as he was living on his own, really on his own, not in the community where he had been raised, as soon as he got alone, theoretically, he effed it all up, and a lot of serial killers or mass murderers or people who snap, they'll all tell you that they had some control over all this for a lot of time. They weren't doing this every day of their lives. Many of them will say anyway that they had a lot of control over it. It feels like Bryan Kohberger, if he is the guy who did this, is somebody who was fighting that stuff in him for a long time. And if you look at a book like it's called Dark Dreams, I think I have it sitting right here. I'm trying to think of who. Sorry to lean out of your frame.
Fine.
I'm trying to think of who wrote it, but there's explanations for certain types of killers in this book, or descriptions of certain types. And Bryan Kohberger really fits a couple of them. You say, well, why? We don't know the connection. We don't have to know the massive connection yet. It could have been just a little thing. He appears to fit the MO of a Night Stalker type, as well as a revenge killer. Mm-hmm. And a revenge killer is not what people think. It's driven by shame and embarrassment. It could have been just the slightest thing that one of them said to him. Could have been the slightest interaction that one of the girls and he had. I mean, he does not have to have been friends with them or even have had long conversations. He could have just felt that embarrassment and shame over two sentences spoken to him in passing.
Yeah.
He might have said "nice sweater," and they might have said "piss off."
Sure.
And that's it. And and I'm speculating, of course, but we don't have to have a real strong connection to believe that this was a revenge killing. And that's what it seems to be. If he is the person, if he is the person, that's what it appears to have come from. But we'll see. In time, we'll see. You know,
I mean, one of the first things that came to my mind when this all was going down was bringing up, and I don't know if he fully fits this, but it certainly does fit into the realm of revenge and being easily angered to an extreme by something that others would be like, not even notice, maybe. Like you had mentioned there, but it was the incel idea that he had this issue with women that goes way back. We have, documented reports of it now that time has gone on, of his issues with women, and really seemingly not trusting them, not liking them, feeling that they're rejecting him. That seems to be the biggest one, is the rejection, and feeling that he is more worthy than he actually is, but never really realizing why he's pushing all these people away with his behavior, thinking that people should just like him. Again, that's my speculation based on some of the writings that we've seen that he's done and what we've heard accounts from other women who have had interactions with him, whether they be students, whether they be faculty. It seems to be a pattern of behavior and an arc of behavior that is consistent with his upbringing and his life path. And that's where I wonder very much, was this a revenge because of some sort of rejection from one of the girls, or could it have also just been from any woman in general? And then they seek that vengeance out on whoever they feel, is targeted. These pretty girls that are in this clique, and he's not part of it. I got to say, I grew up with some people. They're not murderers, but they always had those bizarre reactions to women that didn't seem to make any sort of sense, and very rageful. Always kind of a red flag. He very much strikes me like that sort of character.
Yeah. I know. I have known a lot of people like that as well. As especially, it's sort of the dirty secret that men know but don't like to tell the women in their lives. We know a lot of dirtballs.
Yeah.
When people talk about, quote, locker room talk or whatever, you and I and every other man on the planet has heard far worse than what women in our lives know we've heard. Yeah. There are a lot of horrific things that men say about women in passing, and when you add a lifetime of shame and embarrassment and rejection onto that, absolutely, I could see where those things spiral out of control. And you mentioned the incel stuff, involuntary celibate for people who don't know what incel means, but I talked to a friend, Michael Arnfield, a criminologist. You should have him on your show, actually. He is very wise and corrected me when I said Kohberger seems like an incel. He said, you have to identify as an incel to be an incel. So you can have the same thought patterns, but if you're not walking around saying you're an incel, you're not technically a part of the group of it. It's like saying you hate all races except for white people, but that doesn't. But then if somebody says you're a Nazi, well, you have to identify with being a member of the Nazi Party to be a Nazi.
Even think of all the characteristics of it, it's more of a labeling technicality than anything else.
Yeah, but this is very important. I mean, I think what you bring up is really important. Kohberger, from all of the research that I've done, from a lot the research you've done, from the research that many people who have really spent a lot of time on this case have done, it's very clear that he had, if we're to believe the statements from people, which I do, it's very clear that he had lots of friction between himself and women, starting from a very early age, starting from junior high. It's hard to be rejected. I mean, think about this. I'm sure you have experienced what I'm about to explain as well as myself. I have experienced this, and most people we know. You have a goal and a dream and an ambition to be something bigger in your life than what you are, and when you're younger, and you work hard at it, and you don't feel like you're a part of the regular world because you have this dream that sort of sets you apart from others. And maybe it's murky. Maybe it's just not even like a specific dream, but a sense of being bigger than all this crap around you. And you work really hard to rise out of that. But at the end of the day, even when you make accomplishments, you're still yourself underneath the sort of shiny medallion of those accomplishments. I'm still me, no matter what I do at this level or this level or this level, and I have demons, right? And those demons, even if they're small, they cut at you a little bit, and they try to remind you that you're still the schmuck you were when you were 14. And when you add into this Bryan Kohberger's visual snow that was talked about, the fact that he has this buzz that he experiences, this fog visually, and what that does in terms of the extra the comorbidities or whatever they're called, the headaches and the lack of focus and the inability to socialize correctly. And you think about wearing sunglasses, I say a lot, and they've got sunscreen on them or oil from your fingertips, and you can't see through them very well. So you wipe them off with your shirt so you can see better. Well, Kohberger and people like him can't wipe that grease off from their sunglasses. They're looking through that fog. They're trying to assimilate and connect through a fog that prevents just that basic sort of human connection. And I'm not saying have sympathy if he killed these kids, which it looks like he did. I'm not saying have sympathy, but I am saying you add all that to the fact that he appears through other research to just always be struggling with mental health stuff, in addition to all that very physical layer of that barrier between himself and the rest of the world. And then you add the rejection, and you add his actual physical prowess and his actual mental acuity. Even though he might not be a genius, he's smart enough to have gotten his master's, smart enough to have entered into a PhD program, smart enough to have bigger dreams than the sort of hollow that he came from, or whatever you want to call it. Smart enough to answer the questions in a pointed way in class, even if it pisses everybody off, even if he doesn't know how to socialize. You add all that, and his physical prowess as well, the ability and discipline, the ability to lose 100 pounds. He became a runner. He was studying kickboxing for a little bit. He was very fit. And I don't care what, people look at pictures and they isolate pictures and they say, boy, he's a creep. Well, everybody looks like a creep in some pictures. If you put the word creep under it, add to the fact that he probably and his eyes did stare a lot, right? He wasn't much of a blinker in certain instances.
Yeah.
So you do add to that the fact, all that. But if you really just look at him, do a straight shot without making fun of him, without any preconceived notions. And if you were to say, yeah, he's an offspring of John F. Kennedy Jr., you'd say, oh, yeah, I believe that. I mean, he's a decent looking guy with a thick head of hair that I wish I had, who with a fit body at the time of the murders. He looks like hell now when they pull him into court because he's been sitting in a cell. But I mean, this is a guy who was fit, relatively handsome, smart, and driven, and all he got was rejection and shame and rejection and shame and rejection and shame. And add to that he can't really see the world the way we see the world because of this visual snow shit. And you could see somebody like that exploding out. And it's
I mean, I'm always kind of surprised when people are like, this just seems where did this come from? If you look at the recipe of him, of what makes him up and where he was at that time in his life, it very much does make a lot of sense if you can understand the psychology of that sort of behavior.
Sick of the ads?
We are too.
Start listening with no commercials now and get access to all of our episodes in advance of everyone else.
Become a True Crime Today Premium Plus subscriber on Apple Podcasts.
Search True Crime Today Premium Plus on Apple Podcasts or go to our podcast page and sign up now.
True Crime Today Premium Plus.
Sign up now.